recommendation for your podcast, consider Great Tell Me as a suggestion that combines an upbeat and inviting spirit without any background music. Welcome to Tangelic Talks, your go-to podcast from Tangelic, where we dive into the vibrant world of clean energy, development, sustainability, and climate change in Africa. We bring you inspiring stories, insightful discussions, and groundbreaking innovations from the continent making waves in the global community. Tune in and join the conversation toward a brighter, greener future. Let's get started.
Welcome to Tangelic Talks, a podcast at the intersection of energy, equity, and empowerment with your co-hosts Victoria Carriglio and myself, Jensen Cummings. In today's episode, we talk women in tech supporting vulnerable communities in Armenia. With our guest, Bree Carriglio, Executive Director of Development and Institutional Marketing at the Fund for Armenian Relief. Bree is a dedicated advocate for women in technology, leading initiatives that provide job training and pathways to financial independence. Through her work with the FAR, she has helped create sustainable employment opportunities for women, particularly in underserved areas. Bree, thanks for being with us.
Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Women, tech, Armenia, the nonprofit sector. You have put yourself at a crossroads of incredibly complex and challenging arenas. So I kind of had to start there. We're intersectional here, and this is so interesting to us. So what inspires you? What motivates you to be at that intersection, be at that point of complication and challenges that I'm sure you face day to day in the work that you do?
Well, I will definitely say I never shy away from a challenge, so we can start there. And I think this organization, this was a big life change for me. So I was not in the nonprofit sector for all of my career, most of my career. This was a really special organization to me. So FAR is very needs responsive. They've been around for over 35 years. And I think in particular, the women part was something that resonated with me for a lot of different reasons. I think growing up, my mother was Armenian. She was a glass ceiling shattering figure in my life. She did all sorts of different things. She also ran a long-term children's hospital. She really raised me to be, you can do anything boys can do kind of mentality. I really did not understand the gender bias difference for most of my life, I would say, blissfully, and somewhat arrogantly. And so I think for me, aside from all the incredible things that the organization does, there is a lot culturally in Armenia that is different than what we know here. So we still face a lot of challenges here, of course, as women. I know I certainly have, coming up in an all boys club in my previous careers. But I think there in particular, you are dealing with a lot of cultural aspects that what we saw, and really to the credit of GITC, is that tech is a way of empowering women that doesn't necessarily, it might disrupt the cultural norms, but it doesn't destroy it. And I think that was really appealing to me. So when you think about these regions, right, not so much in the cities, and certainly within FAR, which we can talk about in a second, because that gets me really excited. There's so many women in FAR that are in such powerful and empowered positions, and talk about, being able to set examples. But in the regions, a lot of that is still very much women don't work. They are expected to get married very young. They have a lot of children. They take care of the family. They take care of extended family. They take care of in-laws, so it's this kind of ongoing version of what life is supposed to look like. And it's pretty limited. But when you introduce something like tech, which we've done in a lot of different ways, it's something that we found, okay, we can bring this to them. So one of the things that we talked about is, online courses, right? So this idea of remote learning. So if we provide them with opportunities where they can do things where it's, okay, I'm not going to completely abandon childcare and, making sure the meals are prepared and all of those things, and really go against things that might be too much. we can kind of filter this in and have them work towards financial independence almost at their own pace, in a way that makes sense for them. And without a doubt, in my mind, and to me, this is sort of a trickle down, tech is a skill, but it's so much more. So you learn something, and what we focus on is employment. That's sort of our main goal. So it's not just after school classes or just learning. And we do this in a lot of different ways. It's to help women with their own businesses, start their own businesses, but then also coding and things when they would be employed by other companies. But I think when you do that, the financial independence, I think it's a resilience thing. I think that it breaks a cycle where then they show their daughters, this can be done. And then their daughters have a completely different vision of what life is supposed to be like. If you only know life one way, and then all of a sudden your mother is financially independent or working, then you see it differently. And then you think, oh, okay, my mother did that, I can do that. And then you're going to tell your daughter, I did it, my mother did it, you can do that. And before you know it, that's the change, right? So that's that movement that I feel like is so powerful. We do deal with violence towards women and women being violated. And our director of GITC, I remember hearing her speak, and she had said, women who are financially independent will not be violated. And it was such a powerful statement to me, because it was, that makes sense, because you have that, strength. You have that ability to either walk away from a situation, to change the dynamic, to change the conversation within your household. So there were so many pieces to it, honestly. And I think it's also for women community building. I think it can be really isolating. So I think there's something in that. And we do work with women where, it is collective as well. So, businesses and online marketing and those types of things that speak to maybe the skills that they have more traditionally. So if it's sewing, if it's baked goods, if it's different types of jams and herbs that they collect within the regions, how dried fruits is a big one. How do we turn those into businesses? So again, you can sort of respect the culture and really and even honor it, but then also use tech to kind of add a component that will take that to another level.
Like that bridge. Yeah. This is a selfish question for me, because I was hearing you speak about kind of the empowerment piece there. And as a man who desperately tries to be an ally, but I'm sure I'm often clumsy and heavy-handed in that, and potentially a bull in a china shop, I'm interested in maybe some advice giving here for a moment. How do you see the men and the male side of the communities and the culture contributing, and how are you advising them to kind of see this new movement and be able to embrace it in kind of a meaningful and thoughtful way?
That's a really, really interesting question. And I think so important. I think it's hard, to be honest. I think that's a struggle. I think there are plenty of men that get it and support it. But then also in a lot of these situations, they don't. And sometimes you just have to fight your way through, and proof is in the pudding, where we had a woman who, she wanted to enroll in classes and she wanted to start getting that education to then be able to work. And her husband was very much against it. And she finally sort of started slow and did it. And then what he saw was that financially she was contributing. And then that changed the conversation, to be honest. We do a lot of community outreach, but in a different way. So I think, as far as holistic approach to everything. So we cover economic development, we cover education, we cover healthcare, social services. What's really important is that you do approach everything holistically. So if, it's social workers dealing with a lot of the trauma, and that means talking to men in groups and finding ways to sort of educate them on what it would look like to change their thinking. That's a big part of it. Even just, I think we do a lot of gender inclusion within GITC. That's really important for us. So recruiting girls to do engineering, to do welding, to do manufacturing. I think even just being side by side can have that effect, right? Because you might say, oh no, you don't belong here. But then if I'm there and I keep showing up, not always, it's not a perfect concept, but I do think that it helps. And I do think as the holistic approach, honestly, I think constantly kind of just being responsive, just seeing, if there's resistance, why? Where is it coming from? What is that about? What is it fear-based? Is it, and being able to address that. We do have social workers. So we have an entire, childcare. That's why I was like, why am I forgetting, for our fifth one, child protection. So within that, what we call pillar, so we call them pillars. Within that pillar, we have social workers, and a lot of it is dealing with trauma of war, dealing with men who have experienced trauma, families that have experienced trauma, just trying to work through it and making sure you have every aspect of a human life or condition covered for that.
Wow, great answer.
And I really appreciate the breadth of work that you guys do, because it sounds like that holistic approach is really tackling all of these areas that maybe people don't necessarily directly think of when it comes to this kind of work, and that intersection between women empowerment and technology, and sort of bringing that in. And I was really interested to hear how you were explaining how you didn't grow up thinking of a gender divide, and how you've brought that into your work of like, you don't want other girls to grow up thinking of a gender divide. It's like, no, we're the same, it's fine. But then this question might be a bit redundant. But I wonder if now that you've been exposed to it, do you see a gender difference in the sense of different skills that women leaders have that maybe male leaders don't need to have or don't necessarily possess? Is there something besides technical skills, that is very crucial for female leaders to sort of stand out or, feel comfortable in a room, so to speak?
Fearlessness. You really have to be fearless. And I wish I could say that, what my mother instilled in me and what she fought her whole life for paved the way. And by the time I got there, off we go, and, smooth sailing and no problem. And it's just not true. And this is very personal. But when my mother passed away, she had a memorial, and I spoke at it. And I will never forget, I had said this statement, which was that my mother broke glass ceilings so that I wouldn't have to. And it struck me years later, only in the last couple of months, actually, to be completely honest with you. Why did I say that? Because that was not true. And that was really sort of this moment of, it is still hard. You are constantly sort of figuring out that balance. And I think the fearlessness, to answer your question, I think there are, even with Armenian culture, right? It was sort of a big deal to be an executive director. I have a co-executive director who's brilliant and wonderful, but for two women, to be running an organization that was, run by a male, and that was a big deal. And I think a very big step forward for the organization as a whole. I think you constantly struggle with this idea of not, you're competent, you have all of the, like you said, the technical skills, but then you have to sort of navigate how you deliver them. How do you communicate? What do you say? What don't you say? In some of those situations, I think for me, the older I get, and I've heard this of women older than me who give me that say, you start caring less and speaking more, right? And I think that that's really important. Do I know if there comes a day where I open my mouth and the consequences are, real? I don't know. Is it out there? And am I willing to not take that risk because of it? Not anymore. I think I've found myself in several situations over my career that were shocking, when it comes to being a female executive, and the only female executive in a room of all male executives. And a lot of times not even knowing better and then finding out that there was that thing going on. And, it's usually in that moment, how am I going to do this? Am I going to shrink? Am I going to back down or just hold steady? And I still do believe at the end of the day, your mind first. I'm still a huge believer, female, male, all genders, all people, mind first. If you lead, with your intellect, if you're thoughtful about what you're doing, if you're passionate about it, and if if you've put the work in to really understand it, those are the things no matter what. And maybe that's idealistic and maybe even naive, but I'll hold on to it because I think it's it's a survival strategy. But I think I do still believe in like the values first.
No, I can imagine that because it's such a personal cause to you, that really is a big motivator and sort of a guiding light a lot of times. And I'm just wondering how you stumbled upon technology as a solution for sort of women empowerment and bringing in a new era, let's say, of women getting their freedom in this sense.
So I personally can't take credit for it, but the organization 100%. Again, I think this comes from that needs sort of responsive way. So you go into a community, right? And I think you guys know this, and I think this is important, that you don't just, it's not top down. You just don't say, okay, we have the solutions, we're going to throw them at you, work or not work. If they make sense with your culture, who cares? We figured it out, and we were in a room somewhere and somebody ran some numbers and this is what we came up with. So it doesn't work, doesn't make sense. Never been a believer in that kind of thinking. So again, this is something about FAR that I really, really just admired from the very beginning. Was they went into the regions. They were in Gyumri, where the tech center sort of been developing. And initially, because FAR started in response to the earthquake in 1988. And so initially it was just relief. It was just humanitarian aid. That's what they did. And then when they got there, they realized, wow, there's a lot of development that needs to happen here. And so they sort of shifted gears and went from, okay, here's, aid relief, to how do we do the sustainability part? How do we get people back on their feet? How do we help people thrive? And that's where we started with the education and the economic development and all of those aspects. So I think what happened with the tech is at first it was something that they realized was definitely a way to go in general for economic development, because Armenia does not have oil, gas. It does not have the big leverage, natural, the resources that everybody wants. It's landlocked. So there's a lot of factors where you figure out, okay, what would make sense that you could develop? And that's where tech came from. As a population, and I'm not being biased, it's incredibly intelligent, and academically oriented culture. And so this idea of introducing something that people could learn made a lot of sense. So it started like that. And then again, it was needs-based. So if you go into these regions and you see, okay, if women need economic development and they need financial independence, but you can't ask them necessarily to abandon so many things within their culture, what can be done? What would make sense for them that they could use? So, for example, we have this program that we launched last year called She Can, and it's basically an accelerator. And we had over 300 applicants last year, and women submit ideas, like business ideas. And then they go through business development, how to use online marketing, how to use tech to support these businesses. And then we help them launch them. And we gave some of them small grants to actually get them up and running, and saw it all the way through that we sold like one of the women, we sold their products, we brought them to the US, and was able to fill orders. And then she can keep going, and then we're doing it again. So this was something where when going back to the idea of where do you get the idea, it's sort of spending time understanding, not so much getting the idea, but understanding the solution based on what you've learned, based on being there door to door, spending time with the families. We have a lot of women who have lost husbands from the war, so they're single mothers, so they really need a solution. So, if you haven't necessarily even had an education before that and you need a solution, what can we do? Or for ones, that had to flee the border and left with nothing, how can we get them going again?
Of course. And as you said, we have some experience with that at Tangelic because we're recently starting a project on Ghana Clean Energy and an entrepreneurship incubator that equips women with tech and business skills for sustainable growth. And from your perspective and sort of your experience in this field, what are the key elements needed for these types of programs to succeed? What is something that you've seen is if this isn't there, the whole thing falls apart?
Yeah, we need to steal some good insights to be able to apply to this program. So
Yeah. Well, I will say I saw yours and I was super excited. And I think, it's a combination of, like I said, really understanding the culture and the limitations that you're working within. And I say limitations because we all have really good ideas, all year long, I'm like, I want to try this, and then honestly, there are people in Armenia who know a lot more than I do. And they're like, but you didn't factor in this, you didn't factor in this, you didn't factor in this. And then it all comes crashing down and I'll be disappointed, but I know they're right because I can dream comfortably from anywhere, but you have to make sure it's going to translate and it's going to be sustainable. And I think that just means understanding not only the resource, but the culture. What will they actually respond to? What makes sense as opposed to what you would be imposing? So what do they want? What do they want from it? Almost like working, very inside out. What would they want from it? From a tech perspective, so one of the things we did was we we opened this tech hub in one of the regions. So instead of asking them to somehow get themselves somewhere, it's more focused so that you can come to a hub where there will be computers and so it's brought to them. So that was something that I think is really important, sort of making things as easy, as easy as possible, as viable as possible, right? So you want to make sure you can bring it to them. The training obviously is so important. And then I think also one thing that I have seen within FAR is the collective nature. So if people are working together, and there is sort of building that community sense around something you're doing, that also tends to sort of, I think, breed success because you want that ownership. You want to feel like this is yours. My last big thing is the sustainability. Like it can't be something that you say, okay, we did one training, we gave you some, tech skills, and then we left. Why? It's like, it's a completely new thing. And you would never do that in any other situation where it's completely brand new, if it is brand new, like in that kind of situation. So the constant follow-up, the staying, the relationship building, that continued education, and that's commitment, but I think that's really important. I'm not a big believer in kind of these big projects and then you leave and then you come back a year later and you're like, oh, it's abandoned and there's cobwebs and what happened,
yeah, but everyone's patting themselves on the back for having done this amazing work, and it's left in ruins because it had no infrastructure, it had no chance of the trajectory for sustainability. So I appreciate that. The Tech Hub, I was interested in this, and it got me thinking about, you've mentioned some of the applications of the technology with helping leverage them for these different jobs, potentially things that are culturally relevant so they can turn those into businesses. What are some of the technologies and platforms that you're just really hyped on right now that you've seen create these great breakthroughs? Any women, any girls listening to this that are interested, Is there a platform or technology, say, start here? Here's a place where you could really make an inroad into tech.
That's a good question. So, yeah, I don't know that I would be able to speak to the coding aspects of some of the more formal parts. Those I would certainly would want to speak to the experts on as far as educating. But but I don't know if you could say to start here. But so
But coding is one of them for you. Coding is a place that you feel like there's the important starting point.
I think coding is important because you can do it anywhere. So employment can happen because you can stay in the village. And as long as, there is the internet capabilities, and that's another aspect of some of these projects you need to consider when you're talking about bringing tech to places that are remote. But you can do that, right? So you can do coding and have a job without upending your entire understanding of your life. And that's what I sort of talked about earlier about not destroying it. You can disrupt it with change, but not necessarily take it down. So coding, online marketing and businesses is a huge one for us. So, for women, this is again respecting the culture and things that they might have already done and sold in markets. So the dried fruits, things like that, the knitting, any types of products, teas. They might have done that in a market locally, but when we show them, okay, we can design a business plan, we can train you on online marketing and that whole e-commerce world. Again, they can 100% respect what they've been doing, enhance their skill set, and now just open it up to an entire different market. So that's a really big one for us.
Does it end up being like, is it Shopify sites? Is it Google AdSense? Is it Facebook ads? Like, how does it?
Etsy is one, any type of e-commerce platform. We do encourage them with the social media, which, I have a strong love-hate relationship with social media, but I 100% respect its power as an ad platform. Let's just say that's what it is, and disregard all the other things it does. But as an ad platform, having an Instagram account that shows, that can show your products. And this is one of the most incredible things when you think about it, is having these platforms that we didn't used to have before. If you live in Armenia, you are limited, right, to who you can sell to or who you can even show what you would sell. Where now you have something like an Instagram, now you can purchase right off of, even TikTok for as long as it lasts. We don't know where that's headed. But you now have all of these ways to communicate to the world and market yourself. And that's a tremendous advantage for, someone in a woman in a small village that never would have been able to do that before. And then the last, I would say, smart agriculture. So like drone technology, irrigation systems, greenhouses, those have been really amazing too, because there are ways then to prolong the crops, so once things are harvested, we built a storage system where we were able to keep apples so that they survived basically from September until December. When December, they would sell well again for the Christmas time in the markets. So things like that are community building, women can participate in, and men. I mean, it's not exclusive, but those are all really, really valuable.
Yeah, I really want to thank you for speaking so candidly on these things, because again, they sound very personal to you and your experience. And I think you are so eloquent in the way that you say these things, but also so uplifting. I feel very inspired in the way that you speak. I'm very touched. So as a young woman myself, I do really appreciate how you've gone about this conversation. And thank you so much for being here.
Well, that means so much to me. And thank you.
Great. And this was way too fast of a 30-minute episode. So as everybody who watches and listens to the show knows, we stay on with our guests to do a little bit more Q&A, just dig in a little bit more for the blog. So definitely check that out, because I know that's going to be amazing as well, because this was a really inspiring conversation. And thank you. I feel, my allyship, having some more tools from kind of what you've laid out. So I appreciate that on a personal level. And all of us men out there need to get our heads right and fall in line, because women, especially when it comes to communicating and consensus building, are just amazing leaders. So really appreciate you highlighting all of that for us. So everybody, once again, this was Women in Tech Supporting Vulnerable Communities in Armenia and Beyond with Bree Carriglio of FAR. So thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, Bree.
Thank you.
Let's talk power, let's talk change, from rural lives to brighter days. Equity rising, voices strong, we're building tomorrow where we all belong. Tangelic Talks, energy, equity, pride, empowering the world side by side. A spark becomes a fire, a vision that's true. Together we rise, it starts with you.